Hey, ladies, welcome back to the show. So I'm going to warn everybody right now, my stupid microphone just quit on me and it ripped right out of the cord. So the audio may not be as good as it usually is, but I did not want to cancel today's interview because I've been looking forward to having this guy on the show for months now. I was just telling him I've been on the search to find myself like the guy to talk about minerals and hair tissue mineral analysis. This is the guy. So Dr. Robert Selig is a functional medicine practitioner, hair tissue mineral analysis expert, and owner of Back to Natural Health in the Lincoln Park neighborhood of Chicago. After 30 plus years of experience and research in the natural health field and learning how to cure his own adrenal exhaustion and copper toxicity, he offers adult and child patients individualized care plans tailored around their biochemistry using revolutionary new tests like the HTMA rather than typical blood tests, which don't provide the important cellular information needed to get healthy. Patients can expect increased energy and hormone levels, less brain fog, yes, and chronic infections, natural weight management, and full body healing using the most efficient, time-tested, and effective therapies and methods. So welcome, Dr. Robert Selig. I'm so happy to have you here.
Why, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes. And you do have a very strong Chicago accent, just so you know. I probably sound very Canadian to you, but you sound very American, like very kind of New York, Chicago area. So I can see that that's where you're from. Is that where you're originally from, Chicago?
Actually, originally from Boston.
Okay, there you go. I was going to say, that's why I said New York. I'm like, it sounds like a Boston accent, but yeah, okay. I like it. It's one of my favorites. So there you go.
All right.
Okay, so you have got a pretty interesting story. So I do want you to start with how you fell into getting into this hair tissue mineral analysis and minerals and stuff like that, because you had your own little health problems, didn't you?
Oh, yeah. I think every health practitioner is the wounded healer. And as the wounded healer, we spend a lifetime trying to figure out how we're going to reverse engineer decades of chronicity so we can actually be functional human beings. And so in my 0 to 20, I was like riddled with, horrible teeth, cavities in every tooth, crooked teeth, lost teeth, broken bones. I broke more bones than anyone. So bones and teeth were my weakness. And so I had aches and pains every day. So I said, I'm going to figure this out. And if I die doing it, so be it. And so that was my quest to really learn how I can reverse engineer the toxicity in my body to transmute it into health. And that's what I've been doing. And now at 59 years of age, this is the best I've ever felt in my entire life, but it's been a work in progress. And so every year I'm getting a little bit healthier. The bones are getting a little bit stronger because I'm doing the opposite of what the mainstream is telling you to do. And I've always trusted my intuition, and my intuition has always led me to the minerals. And the minerals really are the spark plugs of life. They are star stuff. So it's written in the stars. So if you know anything about astrology, which is fascinating, the 4 fixed signs in astrology is Scorpio, Aquarius, Leo, Taurus, SALT, salt. It's fixed in the stars. We are the salt of this earth. And so understanding how important the minerals are is the basic premise on how we can get healthy, because minerals run every function of human physiology. So that was my quest, to really learn about the minerals so I could get myself healthiher.
Yeah, I know you're like an old-fashioned alchemist. That's what you remind me of.
I love alchemy. Alchemy is my, because out before science, there was alchemy. So alchemy is the royal science. And so we have to not look at minerals as just soulless electrons, protons, and neutrons. They have an energy, they have a charge, and it's that charge that brings the molecules of emotions to life. And that's why every mineral is associated with a planet. And that, to me, is the most fascinating thing about mineral balancing, is understanding the energetics behind it, not just the physical mineral or metal, but it's the energy behind it. And so that's the most beautiful thing about mineral balancing. And when we look at copper, Copper probably is the most dysregulated metal in all of human physiology because wherever the estrogen goes, copper goes. So we have been inundated with the gazillion xenoestrogens from the titans of industry that have produced all these fake estrogens, and that causes copper retention. And when copper can't be evicted out of the body, it's going to create more hydroxyl radicals than anything else. So copper has always been associated with the planet Venus. Venus is the planet of love, fertility, sex, and beauty, and copper has everything to do with Venus. Even the iconic painting, Botticelli's masterpiece, The Birth of Venus, the Birth of Venus, where you see the beautiful Aphrodite sitting on the calcium oyster shell. What's funny is that oyster breathes using copper. That painting was painted on the island of Cyprus. The word Cyprus in Latin means cuprum. So the birth of the feminine is the birth of copper. It has everything to do with being a woman.
Because it has to do with estrogen.
It has everything to do with the estrogens.
Oh, but what a woman is, estrogen.
Yeah, when a woman's pregnant, the estrogen doubles, the copper doubles. You can even determine the sex of the fetus if you went into the womb. If there's more iron, it's going to be a boy. If it's more copper, it's going to be a girl. We've known this since the beginning of time. The copper IUD works so brilliantly. It's because of the copper inhibits the zinc. So in sperm, the sperm are loaded with zinc. So the copper will block the zinc so you don't get the zinc spark. So when that sperm hits the egg, we call it the zinc spark, the spark of life. And so that's when fertilization has happened. The copper IUD destroys the zinc and it prevents fertilization.
Oh my God. See, and you know what? We had it all figured out so long ago, didn't we? It's just when you start to like dig through that stuff and you look to see how these people back in, tens of thousands of years ago had figured it out, but they relayed the information in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Like the way they connected the planets with the minerals and right? Like where does that come from?
So when we think of the beginning of the universe, the Big Bang, the first three elements from the Big Bang is hydrogen, helium, lithium. The first metal on the periodic table is lithium. Lithium is a metal, but it can cut you can cut it with the butter knife. It's that soft. But that was the building block of the neuron. So hydrogen is a gas, helium is a gas. And so I always say hydrogen is the God particle. God had a son, which is helium, which is Helios, the sun. And then the third metal is why we have a thinking man's brain, that lithium sets the table for every neuron in the body, is why we can, have a cerebrum to think. And this is why when we look at every metal came from the solar system, whether it was from big bangs and birth of stars, death of stars, nebulas, supernovas, it all birthed the elements. And so when they say you are star stuff, you really are star stuff, because that's where we came from. It's these metals that bring life to carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. The inorganic metals bring life to carbon chemistry. And that's why we got to understand how important these nutrient minerals are. And so when you look at the ash content, what's interesting is the ash content, your birth weight, when you go through cremation, when you're dead, your birth weight is your ash weight. And then in the ash weight, mostly it's the 12 mineral salts. There's other things in there, but everyone in that ash content will consist of the 12 essential minerals in the body. And that's what Schussler discovered in the 1800s. And so when we look at these minerals, they last forever. That's why we name great ages of time after them. We have the Iron Age, the Bronze Age, the Silver Age, the Golden Age, because they last forever. And this is how we have to know how important these nutrient metals are, because our goal is to get them into the body, get them into the cell, kick out the toxic metals that block and inhibit these nutrient metals from getting in. And so when we get these nutrient minerals in, now we have a real chance for health. Wow. I know I just went off on a Yeah, different tangent there.
You know what? What I was thinking the whole time is the amount of research that you've done in your time to know all of that, to put all these pieces together. Like you must have researched the heck out of it. Right? Like you must have been spending a lot of time to put all of that together because it's not woo-woo. This is science. This is going back to the way things were thousands and thousands of years ago and how important minerals were even at the beginning of time. So, that just it makes my mind just go.
Yeah. You know, and
Amazing.
when we think about, magnesium to me is the quarterback in the mineral matrix because magnesium is how we create energy in the body. ATP, that universal runs every life force on planet Earth, must have a magnesium ion bound to it. Without it, magnesium is that spark that's going to break the triphosphate bond to release the phosphate to create the energy. And that's why magnesium is so critical for energy production. But when we think of that energy production, that's the sun. Magnesium is the magnetic, majestic, magical mineral that bursts life on planet Earth, because without magnesium, there is no photosynthesis. In the porphyrin ring of a plant, the chlorophyll, the blood of a plant, in the porphyrin, it's magnesium, where your blood is red because of iron. So magnesium sets the entire food chain for planet Earth because it captures the essence of the sun through photosynthesis to create the entire food chain for the planet. And that's one mineral, magnesium. And then you think it is the sun. So the sun has, in alchemy, gold is always the masculine energy of the sun. Hydrogen is the neutral energy of the sun. Magnesium has always been the magnetic, magical, majestic, feminine energy of the sun that bursts life. And that's why magnesium to me is the most important nutrient mineral in the mineral matrix. But again, they're all important.
Right. And so let's take a step back. Why are we seeing, and so everybody knows we tend to now be very mineral deficient, correct? And
Correct.
so this is why we're so passionate about this, is because we are running very low on these minerals. So why is it that nowadays we are running so low on minerals? On magnesium specifically, and then why are we having so much copper? Why are some are in excess and some are in deficient?
Absolutely. So when we think about it, most of the toxic metals we inherit in utero from our mother. So we're getting the toxic copper, the lead, the arsenic, the mercury. We're getting that in utero. Then with each cycle of life we go through, we're being destroyed with more toxic elements. When we're behind a bus riding our bicycle, we're probably breathing in mercury fumes. The NPK soil, the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium soil, has been a disaster because they're not using a high bioavailable potassium. They're using a very toxic potassium. So the soils in the chemical fertilizers have caused a huge deficiency in the nutrient minerals, resulting us being toxic and being deficient. And so it all starts with the soil. The living soil is where it's at. And what have we done to the living soil? We've destroyed it with chemical, artificial, synthetic farming practices. So we have to come back to real farming practices, real organic soils, and understand that these soils absolutely have to have these nutrient minerals in it. So, we can get, from the plants or the animals that eat the plants, so we can get the right absolute minerals into us for our development.
Yes. And so do you find, because you do these tests all day long, we're going to talk about HTMA here in a second, but do you find that most people are deficient in magnesium?
Yeah, almost across the board. So when you think of magnesium, so the reason why hair analysis and HTMA is probably the gold standard for assessing the nutrient minerals. And so when they do a blood test, usually for magnesium, they'll do an RBC magnesium blood test, which is the gold standard in.
Yes, I just had mine done.
Medicine. The problem with that, magnesium is utilized in wherever you see mitochondria, so mitochondria generate the ATP. So when you start with glucose, glucose is going to get phosphorylated, and then it's going to go into the Krebs cycle, then it's going to go into the electron transport chain. So basically, going from glucose to ATP is basically 22 steps. 12 out of those 22 steps require magnesium. So just to generate ATP, 12 out of those 22 steps absolutely need magnesium. But magnesium can be easily blocked by glyphosate, which is death destroying. The glyphosate, the diuretics, the mercury, the copper. Copper will always block magnesium. And so if magnesium can't bind to that ATP, you can't create the necessary energy, to generate all the functions needed. And the first symptom we see is fatigue. How many people are running around chronically fatigued because we're not generating the ATP because of that magnesium deficiency, due to the bad fertilizers, due to the glyphosate, due to the diuretics, due to the toxic metals and other chemicals that chelate magnesium out of the body.
Wow. And so, oh my goodness.
Coming back to that RBC test,
yes.
so the RBCs, what is it about RBCs? They don't have mitochondria. Most of the magnesium is in the mitochondria. So one heart cell, so you got gazillions of heart cells. In one heart cell, you may have 100 mitochondria in one heart cell. So the demand for magnesium is going to be off the roof. So when they're checking your RBCs don't have mitochondria. So there's about 25,000 milligrams of magnesium in the total body. Only 1% of that magnesium is in the blood. And then when they test the RBCs, that's going to be such a low number of magnesium, and that may come back as normal where you're actually deficient, and then you'll experience the cramp in the calf. And that cramp in the calf is, could be a magnesium, could be a potassium deficiency. And that cramp in the calf is letting you know we got a deficiency going on. If we don't address it, the next cramp could be the heart, which would be a heart attack. So a blood test will never, ever tell you the true status of the minerals, because most of the minerals are intracellular. Potassium lives in the cell, zinc lives in the cell, magnesium lives in the cell. And that's why when they do these blood tests, they come back normal. And yet the medical savants, they don't realize that biochemistry happens in the cells, not the blood. The blood does tell us things. It tells us about anemias and leukemias and liver enzymes. So we don't want to throw out blood, but to assess the nutrient minerals, we need a more sophisticated test to give us a window into the biochemistry of the mineral matrix. And the hair analysis, to me, is the gold standard.
Does the blood levels give us any reflection? Like if you're low, will it show up typically low
now,
in the blood or no?
Here's an example.
Okay.
Like I do when I do a blood profile, on every patient that I get, they always have a high anion gap. Have you ever seen that, the anion gap?
Yeah.
So you have cations, you have anions, positive, negative, base, acids. So the anions are the acids. Everyone has a high anion gap, meaning we don't have enough cations. The cations, calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, zinc. So every time I see a high anion gap, it's telling me we're deficient in the cations, specifically magnesium, zinc, and potassium will always be low. And I swear, everyone I test has a high anion gap. So the doctors don't make that connection, but they'll just do an RBC red blood cell test or a blood zinc test, and it'll never tell you the true status of the nutrient minerals. Then when I'm looking at blood, if I see alkaline phosphatase, so that's a liver enzyme, ALK-Phos. When that's low, that's always a zinc deficiency, because the enzyme for ALK-Phos is absolutely zinc dependent. And so this is why, you don't want to throw the blood out because it does tell you things, but you have to be able to, you have to profile a patient, and you want to look at different labs. You want to look at blood, you want to look at stool, you want to look at saliva, you want to look at hair, you want to look at urine. Then when we can profile someone, now we get a better feel for where their biochemistry is at, and now we have something to work with.
Okay, so, and I wrote those things down. Can't wait to go back to my blood work now. But tell us then about why hair tissue mineral analysis is good for it, like is good to test. Why is it that that tells us more than blood?
Yeah. So the hair analysis, so there's a pattern when we're taking the hair. Remember, one strand of hair can put someone in jail or get someone out of jail because, we know how important hair is. So it's an excretory eliminate. It's where, it's an eliminating organ. So we can see it's an excretory organ, but there's distinct patterns in the hair. So when we look at the hair, we're able to analyze calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, and phosphorus. We're able to analyze 5 out of the 7 macro minerals. And then we're also able to analyze the trace elements: copper, iron, zinc, manganese, chromium, selenium, etc. So we get a good window for the metals. Then, more importantly, on a hair analysis, not only do we see the individual metals, calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, etc., we also get a feel for the ratios. The calcium magnesium ratio, the sodium potassium ratio, those two ratios run every time you think, blink, react, secrete, do anything. It's because of the Fab4, sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, because sodium, potassium will instigate an action potential. An action potential is, again, anytime you think, blink, eat, do anything, it's because of sodium flooding in, potassium exiting the cell. And when that hits a certain threshold, that's going to release the calcium through the calcium gated channels. And then the calcium is the impetus to untether the vesicle that contains a hormone or a neurotransmitter. So every time we have an action potential, that's because of the Fab4, calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium. They generate an action potential. That's why those two ratios, you can figure out how the nervous system, how the heart, the brain, the blood sugar, you can figure out everything just by looking at those two ratios. And we see a high calcium magnesium ratio, low calcium magnesium ratio, a low sodium potassium, high sodium potassium. So we gather so much information just based on the ratios. Now, the hair test will also tell us the toxic elements. Are we mobilizing the toxic elements? Or are we a poor eliminator of the toxic elements? Because for a toxic metal to be mobilized out of the body, your adrenals you have to have adrenal reserve, so you need energy, because you just can't dump mercury into the blood or you're dead. So your body has to be able to package up these toxic metals to be able to evict them out intelligently. And then you need adrenal reserves, and you need the liver to be functioning properly, meaning the detoxification organs have to be able to eliminate these metals intelligently. And most of us are walking around with fatty livers, fibrosed livers, scarred up livers, and that's due to toxicity decade after decade, destroying the little biliary caniculi that's going to dump into the portal vein. But when those caniculi in the liver, when they get congested, the toxins can't move, and so they accumulate in the liver. And that's where copper builds up first in the liver. When that copper liver builds up, then it's going to take that excess copper. It may send it to the brain. It may send it to any organ, gland, or tissue in the body, and that will cause the hydroxyl radicals, causing all those free radicals, oxidative stress, oxidative damage. Eventually, depending on where the metals go, is what organ will be affected. But the first place is affected is the liver. That's why all roads lead to the liver. We have to clean out the liver. The liver is where we live, L-I-V-E. Live spelled backwards is evil, evil spirits, chemicals, alcohol, metals, destroy where we really have to, generate health is in the liver. That's why we have to understand how important copper and iron are highly regulated via the liver and the adrenals, kind of modulate those two ions. Because iron and copper have a love affair with oxygen. So some creatures breathe using iron, such as us. Some creatures breathe using copper, such as spiders and some sea creatures like the oyster that I alluded to earlier. So some creatures breathe using copper, some creatures breathe using iron. But the bottom line is they both, iron and copper, have an affinity, have a love affair with oxygen. That's why they get the job done. But in excess, they're going to cause oxidative damage.
Right. So when it comes to the heavy metals on hair tissue mineral analysis, it's my understanding that it'll show current exposure, but it doesn't show what is stored in the organs, because heavy metals will typically be stored in the brain and the bones and the organs, but that you can look at the minerals and be able to tell from that if we are storing a lot of these, or if we have a heavy metal load, that these minerals will be deranged. Is that true?
Yes, that is true. So the thing about hair analysis, you have to be able to do serial hair tissue mineral analysis. So one test, you're going to get information, but you want to see like every 4 months what's going on, because we look at the individual minerals, we look at the ratios, but more important, we look at the mineral patterns from hair test to hair test. So one day on your first hair test, you may have a normal sodium potassium ratio, but then you start the detox process, you start mineralizing the body, and then through that change, you may see that ratio completely go opposite, and now you're in a low sodium potassium ratio, and that low sodium potassium ratio is indicative of chronic infections, chronic metals, chronic everything. And so that's why sodium potassium ratio is the life or death ratio. That's how important it is. And so when we do serial hair analysis, we're able to see the toxic load of the patient, because usually most adults will be poor eliminators. Where when you do a hair test on a child, they haven't scarred and fibrosed and calcified all their organs and glands. So usually you'll see more metals coming out on children, where on adults, you won't see the toxic metals initially, but through the excavation process of mineralization and detoxification, now you're going to start the body starting to mobilize these metals out. And then you'll see a rise in copper, or a rise in mercury, or a rise in aluminum, or one of the toxic metals, or two of the toxic metals. So we have to be able to look at this kind of with a holographic approach. We have to be able to not be that dogmatic, obstinate approach. We have to see the flexibility in the hair analysis and be able to interpret it when someone's a poor eliminator, because these poor eliminators are going to be very common, because you just can't dump mercury into the blood. So if I was able to evict all the mercury out of you, out of every cell, every tissue, every gland, and I took that same mercury, put it in a syringe, injected it back into you, you would die. So the body intelligently will, when the all-seeing brain says it's time to mobilize a metal out, that's because we have some adrenal reserves. That's because we have some patency in the organs of detoxification, where it can mobilize it out, where it won't get stuck in the blood or stuck in an organ. It has to be able to come out. So the body will intelligently release the metal when your body is ready. That's why you never want to force a toxic metal out. Now, in acute exposure, that's a different animal. But in chronic exposure, which is most of us, you have to do this intelligently, or you're going to wreak havoc on whoever the patient may be.
So what's your approach then for somebody that's got heavy metals? Are we doing chelators, or are you just supporting the liver? Just because there's so many different takes on heavy metal chelation, which I've researched for years now, and you start to go down all these different rabbit holes, and some people are like, you got to do it this way, and other people are like, you got to do it this way, and only do IV chelation, do glutathione, don't do glutathione, do, alpha lipoic acid, don't do alpha lipoic acid. So what is your view on this? Because I know you research this like crazy and you work with a lot of people with heavy metals and you get good results with this.
I've dumped more copper than anyone I've known. When I first did my first hair test, my copper was already elevated. I knew it would be because I knew I was copper toxic from the get-go. And so for 3 years, I was dumping copious amounts of copper. I had a copper at 18, at 20, went down to 11, went back up to 18. So I've been dumping copper for 3-4 years. Just recently, my last test, my copper is finally within normal limits, but now I'm dumping nickel. So I'm dumping copious amounts of nickel are coming out of my body. And so, like for 1 month, I had a hip pain. It's like, where the hell is that hip pain coming from? And I knew that on my hair test, I was going to see a metal because I usually have no pain in my body. And so I was like, where's that hip pain coming from? So then on my hair test, I look at my nickel. It was the highest level I've ever seen. And just over the last couple of months, I know that when I do a next hair test, that's going to be way down because the pain is gone. And I really dissolve that pain using homeopathic tissue salts. So when I'm working on getting a metal out, I'm working on mineral balancing. I'm supporting the organs of detoxification. So I'm using the infrared saunas. I'm employing the coffee enemas. I'm coming in with the herbal supplements that support liver, kidneys, skin, whatever. While we're doing the mineral balancing. So the mineral balancing is at the forefront of everything I do. Then I'll come in with organ support, homeopathic organ support. So when we think of a homeopathic remedy for the liver, maybe you're thinking lycopodium, chelidonium, arsenic, nux vomica, nat sulf. You're using one of those homeopathic remedies to add intelligence to the organ, whatever. You could do kidney support, liver support, colon support, whatever. So you want to come in with the homeopathic remedy. And then I never use hardcore chelating agents. I use binders. I may use alpha lipoic acid. I may use bentonite clay, activated charcoals. I may use the modified citrus pectin, the pectisol. I love that stuff. So we do want to come in with some binders to make sure that when we're doing these detox protocols, that the metal doesn't get reabsorbed. Now, even when you come in with all these binders and all these expensive stuff, the metal still may get reabsorbed into the blood, and that may cause a symptom. So when you're doing the detox, you may get a skin aggravation. You may get a headache. If you're dumping out copious amounts of mercury, that will cause the blood pressure to go high. So you have to be able to assess the patient when they start mobilizing a toxic element out. How can we placate that so they don't quit the program? So we come in with a homeopathic remedy. We may have to slow down the nutrient minerals so they can get through the aggravation. That's a Herx reaction. We can call it retracing. We can call it an aggravation or whatever. And we can go back into mineral patterns that we had as a child, where we had anxiety as a child, great fears of a child. So we may re-experience things we had in the past. And so our goal as practitioners is to guide you through that detox, to make it doable, to make it so you don't quit, because we got to get these metals out. If we don't get them out, the end game will be the cancers, the heart disease, the brain diseases.
Yeah, I really think that heavy metals are the root cause of so much of the chronic illness that I see in women that are riddled with hormonal dysfunction. I just had a woman just before this where her adrenals are like, her cortisol's off the charts, her progesterone's off the charts. She feels like garbage. She's got no energy. Her nervous system's fried, and she's just going like, what is the matter with me? And I see this all the time. I see it all the time. And I just think we're so bombarded by these toxins right now. And it's messing with the minerals, which is then messing with the hormones, and it's making it impossible for these women to lose weight. Do you see that a lot with weight problems?
Yeah, with weight, the reason why we're putting on weight, we don't have an obesity epidemic, we have a toxicity epidemic, because fat serves a purpose in the body. It insulates and protects. So it's insulating and protecting your brain. And so the fat is actually protecting you, so you don't lose the weight until you deal with this toxic load. When the toxic load is dealt with, then the fat will come off on its own. So this is the importance of understanding that toxic relationship to the obesity epidemic, because that fat is actually insulating and protecting your nervous system. And so when we look at MS, we get these calcium plaques on the nervous system off the spinal cord, and those calcium plaques is what's causing the short circuit in the nervous system. So this is why in mineral balancing, we always have the spotlight on calcium, because calcium deposition diseases will get us all in the end, but our goal is to slow down from calcium precipitating out of solution. So sodium and potassium are the great monovalent minerals. They're the solvent minerals. They keep ions in solution. So wherever sodium goes, water goes. And so that sodium and potassium keep the calcium in solution. When sodium and potassium go low, calcium precipitates out of solution. Then calcium is a cation. It's going to bind to an anion. An anion is an acid. It can be an oxalic acid, a phosphoric acid, a lactic acid. It could be a uric acid. So when we get the calcium urates, that's our gouty arthritic stuff. When we get the calcium oxalate, that's our kidney stones, our gallstones. When we get the calcium hydroxyapatite, that's all our joint rotten stuff. And so these calcium deposition disease will get us all in the end. And so we have to understand when calcium goes rogue, and that can be seen as a calcium shell on a hair analysis, or a 4-low pattern, or a sympathetic dominant pattern. So we see these common patterns. So our goal is to prevent calcium from depositing. So if it's in the eyes, it's cataracts. If it's in the heart, it's arterial sclerosis. If it's in the kidneys, kidney stones, and the gallbladder, gallstones. If it's in the salivary glands, those salivary stones. So this is why calcium is the big player. Calcium is Father Time, ruled by the planet Saturn. Saturn is undefeated. Father Time will always win. But our goal in mineral balancing is to slow down premature aging by modulating calcium, by keeping calcium in solution. And the great modulator of calcium is sodium, potassium, and magnesium.
Oh,
that makes sense, or did I lose you?
Oh, I was just going to say, I don't know about my listeners, but I feel like I'm in biology class right now. I'm trying to look again, and I was like, oh my God, I want to take notes.
Yeah, I'll try to tone it down and make it more.
No, I love your passion. It's great. I think it'll just be one of those things that people will have to listen to this a few times to really get it. And there's so much to it, right? It's so hard to get it all into one interview, because we can go off on so many different directions with everything that you're talking about here, just sodium and potassium, or just magnesium. Like, we could do a whole hour on just one of these things.
Yeah.
So yeah, so fascinating. So I want to go back to copper a little bit, because there's a lot of, on social media and, books and stuff like that I've read and that I've been looking at lately, is there's some people that are saying that we're copper deficient, and that we're all copper deficient, and we're all in iron overload. And then you get other people that are like, oh, so many of us are copper toxic, and we have this copper overload. And it could be that we have this abundance of copper and we're in copper overload, but we're unable to utilize that copper. So can you tell me more about this?
Beautiful question.
Okay, good.
When scientists was trying to figure out light, they said, light is it waves or particles? So they always said, one group of scientists say it's waves, one group of scientists says it was particles. In actuality, it's both. It's waves and particles. So in copper overload, there is a copper toxicity, and there's also a copper deficiency, because copper has to be bound. If copper is not bound, it's going to behave like a toxic metal, because it's very electronegative. So On the pH scale, pH is the potential of hydrogen. So all of medicine is based on hydrogen. So copper, iron, and iodine are low on the electronegative scale. So they have to be tightly managed because, they will produce more free radicals than anything. So this copper and iron are tightly regulated, but in a copper overload, that means we have copper that's unbound. Copper has to be bound to ceruloplasmin or metallothionein or albumin or some copper chaperone to move it around safely, because you just can't dump a metal in the blood or it will destroy it. So copper and iron, we see an excess iron overload, we see a copper overload, also resulting in deficiencies. So that's the paradox. So we always said, if you want to find the truth, look for the paradox, and that's the paradox. We have an overload, so we're swimming in a sea of copper, but yet we're deficient because it's unbound. We need to be able to bind up that copper, and this is where the adrenals come into play. So the adrenals produce 12 or so hormones, and all the adrenal hormones, all of them have to get sulfated. That's why when you look at a blood test, you see DHEA with an S on it. So they're looking at the sulfated portion of it, because the sulfation allows the adrenal hormone to move from point A to point B. And then when it hits its target, then the sulfur will go do its thing, and then the hormone will do its thing. But the adrenal hormone, the longevity hormone, DHEA, has about 150 functions in the body. One of the functions is to convert to testosterone, but the other functions is to regulate iron and copper in the liver. So the adrenals send a signal to the liver to bind the copper, to dump the copper, or to mobilize the copper. So that's why looking at the hormone status, especially that DHEA, that's why its nickname is called the longevity hormone. And most people I test, that DHEA is crashing. It's always low.
Mine's always low, always. It's always bottomed out.
So when we pick up that adrenal hormone, now we can start mobilizing the copper a little bit more intelligently. So that's that adrenal-liver connection, okay? Did that kind of make sense?
It did. For me, it did. I'm like, oh, that's an aha moment for me, because I always have very low DHEA. I didn't know that. I didn't know that DHEA helped to mobilize copper.
Yeah, so we have 50% of the DHEA is synthesized in the brain, 50% of it is synthesized in the adrenals. So DHEA is absolutely one of the most important longevity hormones that the body makes. So understanding the status of DHEA will give you a window into how well the body is dealing with that copper and the iron, because that's the signal, because everything needs a hormonal neural signal to do this or to do that. And DHEA is the signal that tells the liver what to do with the iron and the copper.
So if somebody takes supplemental DHEA, will that then help their body to utilize iron and copper?
That's a great question. Now, it depends. Yes would be my first answer. Okay, but you always have to work for the nutrient. You just can't sit there and pop pills and take this and take that. You have to work for the nutrient. So you got to understand the energy you're putting in. The adrenals are a battery source. So like any battery, to recharge the battery, you plug it in. To recharge our batteries, we have to be able to de-stress the emotional dramas and traumas. We got to be able to focus on that parasympathetic, stay and play, rest and digest, breed and feed. We have to know how to relax, to not be in that sympathetic, go, 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 fight, 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 climb that corporate ladder of success. We have to realize that we have to understand that every illness is actually a blessing if we listen to what the symptom, the illness is trying to teach us. And so when we're healing, we're not just popping pills, we're working for the nutrient. We're slowing down, we're resting, we're hitting the infrared saunas, we're hitting the coffee enemas, we're focusing on the hydration, we're dealing with the emotional stuff. And as the adrenal reserves come up, now we're going to have the courage to face those things that we didn't want to face, that we swept under the carpet and we just didn't want to deal with it because we didn't have the energy to face what we needed to face. So healing is always, it's a scientific approach. It's an alchemical approach. It's art and science. And so when we understand the art and science of healing, you need the two worlds, the right brain and the left brain, have to come together to function as one. And that's the healing journey. So it's not just taking the DHEA, it's working for the DHEA. So I'm going to recharge my adrenals, but if I'm still loaded with stresses, I don't care how much DHEA you're taking, it's not going to do anything. That's why I say you always have to work for the mineral, the nutrient, the vitamin, the hormone, whatever you're taking.
Yeah, because we know too that stress, just stress alone, will also deplete sodium and potassium.
Oh,
So you
yes.
can sit there and take a bunch of sodium and potassium, but if the root cause is your stress levels, you can only get so far with the supplementation. Same with adrenal supplements. I always tell people that it's like, okay, I can tell you what to take to help, boost your cortisol levels or block your cortisol levels. But if you're not dealing with your stress and what caused it, you're only going to get so far.
Right. And that's the importance of, like, when I wanted to answer that question, well, DHE out, yes. But as long as we're doing a multifactorial approach to healing, we're not just popping the pill, we're really working on the emotional level, the physical level, the spiritual level, the detox level, because it's all encompassing. It's not, if it was easy, we'd all be healthy. But
Yeah.
it takes years to mobilize out a toxic metal. I've seen some of my patients, it took me 3 years before we finally started to see a metal dump. And I'm okay with that. They're saying, how come my metals aren't coming out? Your body isn't ready. And so eventually the body will get ready as you keep working on it, because healing is a long, arduous journey, but it's the greatest journey we'll ever go on, because our goal is to age gracefully without cancer and all these crippling diseases and the senility diseases. Oh my God, it's like a nightmare. Yeah. And so hopefully we're going to do this intelligently, whimsically. We're going to have some humor in this. And then when we do hit that speed bump, we don't hit the panic button. We don't give up and take a pharmaceutical. We ride the storm out. And that's where the homeopathic remedies are indispensable, beautiful remedies to help us get through any aggravation. So our goal isn't to avoid it. We have to go through it. And when we go through it, can we go through it intelligently so we don't quit the program?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I know that lead, because I've got like off the chart levels of lead. And as I started researching it, everything I came across was like, this could take anywhere from 7 to 14 years to get rid of. And I was like,
30 years.
Yeah, 30 years.
30 years, because it's the planet Saturn. Saturn is the slowest orb in the solar system. It takes about 30 years for it to rotate around the sun. So the quintessence of the planet Saturn is lead, and lead and calcium are Saturn energy. So lead will displace calcium always. And so you'll see anyone that has a lead toxicity will usually have high calcium or very low calcium on a hair analysis. And so lead is a deafening element. That's why, in x-rays, when you go to the dentist, they put those lead aprons on, because it blocks light, because it shields the light of the sun. That's why the sun and Saturn are they're opposites of each other. One is the light, one is that dark, deafening lead element. And when you think about what element has killed more than anyone on the periodic table of elements, lead. Lead bullet, lead paints, lead chips, lead gas, etc. So lead, and that's the theme of Saturn. Saturn is death and darkness and aging. That's why it's the Grim Reaper. That's why it's Father Time. So lead has killed more than anyone, but will always displace calcium. So that's why when we're evicting the lead out, you got to be patient. That's why we have to be able to pick up those adrenals, clean out the liver, and then the body will slowly dump the lead. And then you'll see the calcium, when the lead comes out, the calcium goes down, because now the calcium is getting into the cell, a bone cell or something.
Okay, I had no idea about that. Wow. And so I just tested my copper levels and my ceruloplasmin. So
Uh-huh.
does that tell me anything? Or because
Yeah,
it's blood work, it doesn't?
it gives you some insight, so usually, most people so ceruloplasm is, it's a major copper chaperone, has a lot to do with iron and the whole hepcidin type of thing. But ceruloplasm is also an acute phase reactant, so it can be elevated in pregnancy. It can be elevated in an infection. It can be elevated in any autoimmune disease because its second job, its day job, is an acute reaction element. So it's going to respond to the stresses of life, and that can elevate ceruloplasm or it can decrease ceruloplasm. And ceruloplasm is going to lock and load probably about 7 copper ions, and then it has to fold properly. And so if you don't get all that copper into that ceruloplasm, it won't fold properly. And ceruloplasm is the most fascinating enzyme. It's made up probably about 1,100 amino acids. To put that in perspective, insulin's probably about 55 amino acids. And so ceruloplasmin is about 1,100 amino acids. So it's a very complex thing. So it's working as a copper chaperone, an iron chaperone, but it's also an acute phase reactant protein to deal with inflammation in the body.
Wow. Okay. Well, I didn't have great levels. Mine was on the low side and my copper was on the low side.
Now think about this. Where is that ceruloplasmin made and regulated? In the
I don't know.
liver.
In the liver.
Yep. All roads lead to the liver. So put the spotlight on the liver and start thinking how you're going to support the liver. And that liver is that very jovial energy. And when the liver goes offline, that's where we get the gall of life, the bilious temperament. That's where the anger and all, we become very reactive because the liver gets congested. When that liver fire rises, that's the floaters in the eyes, that's the grinding of the teeth, that's the neck pain, the headaches, and all that stuff. So that's why we got to deal with the liver stuff. And that's where the copper's regulated in that liver, the iron's regulated in the liver. Liver does everything.
Oh my, I can't wait to do this. So I have not done an HTMA yet. I was just telling Dr. Selig before we started that I've got my kit. I'm ready to do it. I'm just growing my hair out because you need to have unbleached, uncolored hair. And I used to have very short hair too. So I've been growing it out. I've got some nice raw hair that has not been touched by bleach for once in my life. So I'm going to be sending my kit in soon, and then I'm going to get Robert here to have a session with me so he can go through this all with me because there's a lot.
We'll make sense of it. We'll put it together because, again, when I look at a hair test, more important than the actual mineral is the mineral ratios.
Right.
So when you look at time, this is my analogy. So a minute is 60 seconds. That's the quantity. So the quantity of a minute is 60 seconds, but the quality of that minute, when it's good, that minute can feel like a second. When that quality of that minute is horrible, can feel like an hour. That's the mineral ratios. So the ratios tell us about the quality, where the individual mineral just tell us about the quantity. So we're looking at the quantity and the quality, and then we get a better feel for what is going on. And so these minerals are absolutely the most dynamic thing. And every mineral corresponds to a planet. And that's where, you walk down that esoteric path, it gets even more fascinating.
I know. Well, I can't wait for that too. Give us some examples of just the ratio thing. Like if somebody has high calcium and low magnesium, or high sodium, low, like what could that tell us, like about the thyroid, the adrenals, our energy, whatever?
Okay, so let's go with calcium magnesium. That's one of my favorite ratios. So every time a muscle contracts, calcium contracts, magnesium relaxes. So when I said muscle, that could be heart muscle, skeletal muscle, smooth muscle. So when women get those uterine cramps and they're bent over and the uterus is just, periods from hell, and they have their pain is horrible, this is where magnesium helps to relax the muscle of the uterus, because the calcium is causing the contractions, and that's causing the spasm and all that pain. If it's the heart, that calcium is contracting, and so What would a cardiologist give you if you have high blood pressure? They put you on a calcium channel blocker to prevent the heart from contracting to decrease the blood pressure, when all they had to do is come in with magnesium. So
Right.
so when we think of any excitable tissue, brain, heart, muscle, nerve, all that is calcium and magnesium. So when we have a high calcium, low magnesium ratio, the nervous system is going to be misfiring on every level. And so if the calcium ratio is too low, that's going to be very indicative of a lot of blood sugar stuff. And again, twitches, spasms, tics, whether it's in the calves, the feet, the eye twitching, the spasms. So that's why calcium magnesium has everything to do with all these excitable tissues, especially the heart, the muscles, the nerves.
Mm. What about thyroid?
Thyroid is the calcium potassium ratio. So that calcium potassium ratio, so that calcium acts as a signaling molecule. So it helps to, send signals. But when that calcium builds up, then the sodium potassium, the cell membrane becomes, you put up like a calcium wall, like a shell on the cell membrane. And so it kind of puts like cement on the cell membrane. And then the potassium can't sensitize the thyroid hormone from getting into the cell, because that calcium shell decreases cell permeability, and then the potassium can't sensitize the thyroid hormone from entering into the cell. So the calcium potassium ratio is very indicative of the thyroid ratio. So when I see a high calcium potassium ratio, and then you do a blood test, you're going to see high TSH, and that usually will map out beautifully. So there's a lot of connections. So that's why I said you don't want to throw out the blood test, because it does tell you things, but you want to be able to put it all together so you can see it from different angles, different perspectives, and then you can start the process of healing when we have all the information in front of us. So that's why we also want to look at a stool test. We want to see, where are the microbes? Are we making stomach acid? So usually on a stool test, we can figure out the pancreatic enzymes, we can figure out the gut dysbiosis stuff, and we can see almost the most common infection in the world is H. pylori.
Yeah.
So H. pylori is almost prevalent in 50% of the population. And that's because of a zinc deficiency. Because to make stomach acid, you got to have zinc. Zinc is the main player in making your stomach acid. And so that stomach acid, when you have low stomach acid, all these infections, the H. pylori, the Clostridium, the Candidas, all that thrive in a low stomach acid. When you pick up that stomach acid, meaning when you pick up the zinc, you're going to be able to make stomach acid. And when you have stomach acid, that's your first line defense. And that's going to put the minerals in the right valency so they can be absorbed. That stomach acid is going to tell the liver to make and mobilize bile. That stomach acid is going to send signals to the pancreas to make and mobilize pancreatic juices. So the stomach acid, the HCl, is one of the most important things to fix. And to fix that stomach acid, zinc is the all-star in making your stomach acid.
I didn't know that either. Oh my goodness. How do I not know that?
That's why you have me on.
That's right. I learned from my guests. It's amazing.
You gotta hear me ramble on about, a gazillion other things, but I'll get to the meat and potato of things.
Yeah. Fascinating. Okay. So where can people find you? Because you do take on patients still, is that right? Like
Yes,
you're working with people actively?
I probably right now have about a 1 month waiting list right now, because I don't like to take on too much, because I need time for my study, for my healing. So I'm not here to overwhelm myself with just work. So I need my energy for me. So I only take on 5 new patients a month. That's my limit. And that's where I can work, at my speed, at a comfortable level where I'm not overwhelming myself, because I'm in this for the long game. I'm not in for short-term fixes. And so people can always find me at Back to Natural Health. And, I can help, design nutrient plans, detoxification plans, and to put people on good homeopathic prescribing and using the tissue salts, using constitutional prescribing, using whatever we need to help move the healing needle into a favorable place.
And you can see people from anywhere?
Oh,
Like
yeah,
they don't
I
need
got
to be in
people all
person.
over the world. I got Canada, I got Switzerland, I got what's another country I have? What's right next to Spain? Portugal.
Oh, good, good. Yes, I know. I've got people from all over the world. I think it's such just an amazing thing that we can do that. I have women in Kuwait. I have like a following.
Yeah, I actually have someone in Kuwait too.
Yeah, it's just fascinating. It's such a different culture than ours. So
it really is.
yeah. Okay. So that's great. So everybody heard that. I'm going to link to his website in the show notes. And then you require people to do the HTMA before working with you. So you sell those as well?
Yeah. So what I do is after I consult you, first my wife will screen the patient to see, are we a fit to work together?
Yeah.
My wife will explain how the practice works. Then once she screens the patient, then I'll have a Zoom meeting to see if we are a real fit. And then once I say, yeah, we can work together, then I'm going to put together a care plan. And in the care plan, I can guarantee hair analysis will be there, a GI map will be there, and then maybe some other labs, maybe a blood test, maybe a organic acid test, maybe a mold test, maybe a candida test. So I will put together a care plan based on your medical history, based on your symptoms, based on your pharmacological intervention that you've had in the past. And so I need to be able to profile you from every aspect. And when I profile a patient, yes, I use astrology. Yes, I use biochemistry. Yes, I use the emotional part of our lives. And so never well since a broken heart, never well since a concussion, never well. So that never well since is a key way of how I can prescribe homeopathic remedies. And so that's why when I profile someone, it's just not one thing, but the hair test will absolutely be included.
Right. Okay, awesome. All right, well, thank you so much. I feel like I could have gone off in a million different directions, so we'll probably have to have you back on again.
Yeah, whenever you want, we can do another revisit, and then when you get your hair test, just hook me up and we'll have a little Zoom chat, and I'll be happy to explain your hair test to you.
Awesome, awesome. And then I'll maybe just air that and let everybody know what Karen had on her hair test. That'll be a good episode. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.